I'd like to introduce our next presenter. Some years ago, when I met Congressman Burton, he asked me whether he told me he'd like to do a hearing on dental amalgam. He was very interested in the mercury issue for reasons he'll explain to you shortly. And after a little bit, John Rowe, who was working on his staff at that time, and I met. And once John got on the task, the first amalgam congressional hearing happened very quickly. John was such a quick study. He was such a pleasure to work with. I wanted him to say a few words this morning to kind of give you an idea of what's gone on in that realm, in the political arena in Washington, D.C. So please welcome John Rowe.
Okay, good morning. I agree with your founding president in the remarks he made yesterday that you're all winners. And it's real important to me to be able to associate with a bunch of winners, because everything that Boyd just said about the decision makers in Washington is true. So it's not a lot of fun spending your days dealing with those people. Stealing one of Boyd's lines, it's like a 20-year argument with a town drunk. It's just incredibly frustrating. So it's great to be here, to be reinforced with the information, which is solid, to make me bulletproof, and to give me the courage to jump back into that cesspool when I get back to Washington, D.C., or what I refer to as Disneyland East. Now, as Rich said, shortly after joining Congressman Burton's staff, and he had been working on the thimerosal issue for quite some time and was making considerable progress, he called me in and said, take a look at this dental amalgam dispute. There's emerging evidence that dentistry also is aggravating this problem of mercury toxicity. And I said, okay, I'll check it out. I left his office scratching my head thinking, nah, that can't be true. Dentists wouldn't do that. They're healers. They're looking out for people. They're not harming people. But I was shocked to discover, after only a few hours of research, that, well, maybe some of them are causing harm, and a great deal of harm. And I quickly became frustrated because in doing a bit of rudimentary research, I came across Dr. Mark Geyer and his son David Geyer. They worked on the thimerosal side of things, and they identified more than 1,500 credible scientific papers documenting the evidence of harm from thimerosal. 1,500 credible papers. I then came across the work of Mats Berlin, who many of you know. He studied 936 papers on the connection between amalgam and mercury, and he deemed over 700 of those papers were credible. 1,500 on thimerosal, 700 on amalgam, but our FDA can't find one single article that persuades them that there's any harm here. So the rather blunt comments that Boyd just made to you about the incompetence of our FDA, I agree with that in spades. I quadruple his anger about that. So Congressman Burton, as Rich said, told me to look into this, that we would have some hearings. The first one was November of 2002, shortly after coming back, my first experience of meeting with you here in the IAOMT and getting a real earful about the dangers of the mercury. We titled this hearing, Mercury in Dental Amalgams, an Examination of the Science, because I was so impressed that the IAOMT is a science-based organization. So we had the pro-mercury witnesses there from the ADA, the FDA, and the National Institutes of Health. And it was very disappointing. They told anecdotes. They quoted a little bit of junk science. They dodged, they ducked, they evaded. At the end of their conversation, my only conclusion was their only motive in testifying at the hearing was covering their butts for the many mistakes they'd been making along the way. Then we had a panel of opponents of mercury, and that panel included Boyd Haley and Rich Fisher, and also Michael Bender of the Mercury Policy Project, who's become a strong ally. These people had the proper credentials for their testimony. Their testimony was based on science. They were truly credible. So there was no contest there. The anti-mercury people carried the day hands down. We followed that up with a hearing titled Consumer Choice in Implementing Full Disclosure in Dentistry. You know, it's an amazing thing to me as a layperson, a non-medical person, that in every other facet of medical treatment, informed consent is practically a sacred thing. Also, labeling is an incredibly exacting thing. The FDA is almost fanatical about the labels when it comes to supplements or prescriptions. But none of that applies to dentistry. Products are shipped to dentists with a skull and crossbones on their label. In the European Union, they also have a picture of a dead tree to illustrate that it's also harmful to the environment. But outside of people that practice biological dentistry, that information is just not revealed to the patient at all. And I think that's criminal. I just think that is, well, I can't use the words that I want to use to describe my feeling about those people. Our third hearing, Consumer Choice in Implementing Full Disclosure in Dentistry. Oh, I'm sorry, I already did that one. At any rate, at that second hearing, our people wanted proper labels. They wanted fact sheets for the patients, and the FDA and the ADA people were saying no, 1,000 times no. And again, it was just wrong. In October of 2008, we turned to the environmental impact of mercury and what dentistry does to the environment. And there was testimony after testimony that dentistry is the largest contributor to mercury in the sewage treatment plants. The plants can't treat it, and since mercury is a basic element, it's always mercury in all of its forms. And whether it's through being discharged into the streams, or the sludge being incinerated, or the sludge being sold as soil amendments to the farmers and the landscapers, it is all returned to the environment, 100% of it. We had an EPA witness there this time, Environmental Protection Agency, supposedly their top water guy, the real water expert. And I'm sorry, but he was just dumb as a box of rocks. He was just, well, he was either totally content-free or he was a damn liar. I'm not sure which. Maybe a mixture of each. Now, I suppose to be just a little bit fair to the EPA, I do have to point out that they are funded for hundreds of millions of dollars a year by Congress to study the smokestack issues and the mercury emissions from that. And they don't receive a lot of funding on the dental issues. So I guess you'd say they're doing what they're paid for. But nevertheless, when their top water guy comes in and says, oh, there's no problem, there's no problem. Besides, that mercury from the dentist's office is not in the form that can be absorbed by plants or animals, seem to be totally unaware that mercury quickly methylates in wet, warm circumstances, such as sewage treatment plants, streams, the bodies of mammals and fish and human beings. Again, it was back to arguing with the town drunk, as Boyd says. And by the way, that first day, one reason that I so quickly was able to conclude that there really is a problem here is an internet search. I found several documents written by Boyd, and they made sense to me. I took them in to my boss, Congressman Burton, and said, "Who's this guy out in Kentucky, this Boyd Haley?" And he didn't make any Kentucky jokes. He said, "That man is brilliant. He is probably the best researcher in the world on this mercury toxicity issue. Learn everything you can from him." And that's what I've done. We had a plan for closing the circle on this, but as happens in republics such as ours, elections come along, the majority party changed hands. And I was kind of worried there for a while that, whoops, okay, is this the end of our work? But it turns out it's not, because there are a handful of people in each party that don't care one whit about the politics when it comes to health issues such as this. And so the work has continued under the chairmanship of Dennis Kucinich, who chairs the Domestic Policy Subcommittee of the House of Representatives. And there's a connection there because the CAM caucus, Complementary and Alternative Medicine caucus of the Congress, was co-chaired by Congressman Dan Burton, Congressman Kucinich, and over on the Senate side by Senator Harkin and Senator Hatch. So there's a Democrat and a Republican co-chair in each house of the Congress, and Kucinich was one of those co-chairs. So he's gone ahead. He's had 2 more hearings on the environmental damage. And again, the evidence is just overwhelming that in community after community, it's the effluent from the dental offices that's the largest contributor of mercury to the wastewater stream. Now, the ADA came in bragging about having amended their best practices, that they are now recommending amalgam separators for all dentist offices. So they and their cohorts were testifying that there's no reason for this hearing. The problem is solved. We've recommended it in our best practices. And they stated everything as if it was settled. It was done. The issue was over. But the simple fact is fewer than 2% of the U.S. dentists at that time have amalgam separators. And as Rich Fisher pointed out to us, not one member of that ADA committee that recommended the amalgam separators had one in their own dental practice. And not one of them intended to ever get one. So it was just a total smokescreen once again. You've all heard about the joint panels that makes recommendations to the Food and Drug Administration. This was in September of 2006. Your Michael Fleming was an invaluable person in leading the discussion there. The FDA came up with a white paper. They were going to settle this issue once and for all, and they wrote a paper that basically said, no harm, no foul, mercury is great stuff, it doesn't hurt anybody. And they wanted these 2 advisory committees, the neurological and the dental panels, to rubber stamp the white paper, but they didn't. We had 2 full days of testimony. 95% of the testimony opposed to mercury. I was just one of many who testified there. But the discussion leader was your Michael Fleming. And these joint panels rejected the white paper whitewash by a vote of 13-7. And they made recommendations for additional study and steps for the FDA to take. But the FDA is pretty doggone resilient. You know, once in a while they do stumble across some facts, just as they did on that day. But they get up and brush themselves off and go on their way as if nothing had ever happened. And that's what they did in the aftermath of that. They followed through on none of the recommendation of those panels. You heard about the Moms Against Mercury lawsuit. where there was a negotiated settlement, and at least the FDA put some warnings for pregnant women and young children. Mercury toxicity might have an effect on them. And they promised by a date certain to classify mercury. Now, a lot of you participated in sending in documentation during the comment period. I literally carried boxes of persuasive documentation down to the appropriate office at the FDA to get it on the record. But lo and behold, what did they do with the classification? They said it would be Class 2 with so-called special controls, but the special controls are meaningless. It doesn't mean a thing. They endorsed the continued use of mercury-based amalgam in everyone, the elderly, women of childbearing age, pregnant women, young children. It was just another absolute tragedy. That same day, they took the warnings off of their website. Now, coming to today, our FDA Commissioner, Elizabeth Hamburg, has a rather striking conflict of interest for the position that she's in. For 5 years, she served on the board of the largest amalgam distributor in the United States, Henry Schein Incorporated. During those 5 years, for her part-time advice to Henry Schein, she collected about $1.25 million. Well, not bad for part-time work. Now, she still owned a lot of Henry Schein stock when she was appointed FDA Commissioner. A few months after taking office, she did sell her stock, but she did not sell stock options, which I think are around 200,000 shares she had the options for. She finally did dispose of those about 2 weeks before the Class 2 ruling came out. And oh yes, backing up during her Senate confirmation, Senator Enzi of Wyoming asked her some questions about this amalgam issue, bless his heart. And she promised that she would personally work on the classification issue. She would oversee it. Well, when the ruling came out that it's Class 2 instead of Class 3 where it belongs, she said, "Oh, I didn't exert any influence on that. I recused myself." So we've been pressing for the documentation that proves when she recused herself. Finally got a reply from the attorney at the FDA saying, well, there is no documentation. Recusals can be verbal as well as written, and she just verbally excused herself from the rulemaking. And but they have refused, pig-headedly refused to tell us when. And I guess I'm a suspicious sort of guy, because I think the ruling was, the outcome was made very, very, very clear to the FDA staff before that alleged recusal took place. So that has angered some members of Congress. I won't give you the names here because the conversation hasn't taken place yet, but the commissioner will be summoned to a congressional office soon. Her resignation will be demanded. It won't happen because there is a sharp division between the legislative and the administrative in this government, but it will express great displeasure. It will put pressure on her, and it will be part of this full court press that we have jointly been aiming at the Food and Drug Administration. And finally, what do you think about the second in command, Dr. Sharfstein? He was a real champion of reducing lead poisoning in inner city areas. He was health commissioner in the city of Baltimore, and he did some very fine work in the inner city of Baltimore in trying to reduce the exposure of kids to lead. And he's really to be commended for that. But when the phantom recusal came along on the classification, he was put in charge of making the final decision. And it just really puzzles the heck out of me. Lead, bad. Mercury, good. Now what sense does that make? Well, we all know it doesn't make any sense. There's a publication called an organization called the Health Freedom Alliance, and on August 11th, I want to quote a paragraph from their lead article that day. They stated, "Any scientific capability the FDA may have been clinging to in these last few years has now disintegrated with the agency's recent announcement that after reviewing 200 scientific studies, it is concluded that mercury fillings are safe for human health. This ruling further demonstrates how the FDA is a rogue federal agency that respects no law and frequently operates in direct violation of the law." I agree 100% with that paragraph. Well, we can't give up, and we're not giving up. And the IAOMT is in there fighting tooth and nail on several fronts. I think you've heard about the lawsuits that we're pressing. I agree with what Boyd said a few minutes ago. We need to send letters to the president. Demand that he remove the commissioner who thinks it's fine to poison our population with the mercury. We need to request a FDA Inspector General investigation into that conflict of interest. It was so blatant. We need to write letters to the editor of the publications in our own community. Terry Messerman was interviewed recently in Cleveland and did a brilliant job, and they quoted him accurately. I managed to get a letter in the Washington Times on August 26th, and that's read by people on Capitol Hill. But we need to be getting them in the hometown papers, too, all around the country. Those of you that are inclined to be writers, do op-ed, editorials, and send them to your local paper. They won't all get published, but some of them will, and some of them can make a difference. We've got some really great videos. Dave Kennedy has produced several, and the University of Calgary has, and a group called Uninformed Consent in Washington State has. But the number of people that view them is kind of modest. I've been playing recently with these social networking sites like YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, etc. We need to become familiar with these sites and use them to drive people to these dramatic videos we have. We can put in links to the video, so all they have to do is click on it, and up will come the smoking tooth or the other issues that you're passionate about here. I don't know whether this will make a difference, but using these social networking sites, I'm now being followed by Newt Gingrich, Dick Armey, Michael Steele, Oliver North, half a dozen other people of national stature. And many of you could do that too. Now, I don't know whether they're going to help us act on this, but I sure don't know that they aren't, and it's got to help to try. Prevention. In the healthcare debate that's going on, prevention is being touted, and that's good. That's very good. We all know that an ounce of prevention is worth more than a pound of cure. Well, we need to be writing letters to the White House and to Congressman Henry Waxman and to your other members of Congress that one of the most dramatic things we can do in prevention, and therefore bring down healthcare costs, is to stop poisoning our people by jamming a neurotoxin and a nephrotoxin into their mouth. Think of the lifelong, expensive, debilitating diseases we won't have to deal with if we just stop poisoning our people. So I'm hoping and trying to get an amendment slipped in to the health care legislation that sharply curtails or perhaps even bans the use of amalgam. And I really think you should write to your members of Congress about that sort of thing. For sake of time, let me wrap up with just two more thoughts. I don't know what your politics is. I don't care. It doesn't matter. There's nothing partisan about this mercury crisis. But it's interesting, the tea parties, the town hall meetings, there's been an uproar that we haven't seen since the demonstrations of the Vietnam War. And a lot of members of Congress who are not in the mode of public servants, a lot of members of Congress are being taught, whoa, the people don't work for them, they work for the people. And there are a lot of members that are concerned about their reelection. And I think a framework has been set up where they're going to be a lot more receptive to listening to their constituents now than they have been for a lot of years. So in my opinion, this is the right time to try to influence your member of Congress. Now, I just want to make one comment about Congressman Dan Burton. I don't want to interfere with Rich's introduction, because if I upstage him, he is my dentist, and he'll hurt me the next time I'm in the chair. So I'll just point out that Dan and I, we were comparing notes last night. We've known each other for at least 46 years, since we were both a couple of young whippersnappers back in Indianapolis, Indiana. My wife Marguerite said we need to get together to celebrate our golden anniversary when the 50-year mark comes. I have seen him since he was a young man in his 20s work so hard in political organization, then in the Indiana State House of Representatives, then the State Senate, and now the Congress. He has never wavered from his conviction, no matter what the subject is. He took on the thimerosal issue, got it out of most of the childhood vaccination series, even though its producer is Eli Lilly, and they have thousands of voters in his district. Lilly threatened him, and he said, I don't care. We're going to get rid of thimerosal. This frustrating, beating our head against the wall, believe it or not, reminds me of when I was a little kid in North Dakota. We had a house without electricity, and every now and then, when my dad had some money, we'd put the sign in the window, and the iceman would stop. And he would haul in this huge block of ice, because we had this non-electric ice box. And me and my older brother, we'd argue as to who got to use the ice pick, because we had to split it in half in order to get it through the door into our ice box. And we both just loved doing that, making a mess with the ice chips, etc. But we'd sit there and pound on that darn thing for what seemed like forever, again and again and again, and sometimes it took hundreds of whacks. Till finally, you'd see one little fissure start there. And the next whack, that crack would go all the way to the bottom. And finally, one more, it would split wide open. Now, for all in the world, it looked like the only thing that did any good was that last 2 or 3 whacks in breaking that block of ice. But that's not true. It was a cumulative effect. Every single whack with that ice pick contributed to the whole. I have the strong feeling, just as Michael Jackson, your incoming president, does, this may be the year that we break this thing wide open. Because we're right and they're wrong, and we're going to win this fight.
Yesterday, you had an opportunity to meet some of the true heroes and giants of this movement and of the Academy. I want to introduce another one this morning to you that some of you don't know. Dr. Graham Hall, who ran the IAOMT European chapter when he was practicing in Germany, single-handedly, from his own pocket, spent $250,000 from his own coffers, never asked IAOMT for a dime of support or anyone else, to get dental amalgam banned in Germany. and he got that done. The result was basically to make him leave Germany in the cover of night because of death threats. And I'm not dramatizing this. I'd like you to meet Dr. Graham Hall, his wife Lillian Winquist Hall, two dentists in the back row. Please stand up. Graham and Lillian, turn around. There are some heroes. Thank you for everything you've done.